The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of burning sand beneath a pitiless sun. For 3 days, Evelyn had stumbled forward, her throat cracked, lips bleeding, her mind drifting between faint dreams and harsh reality. Each step seemed heavier than the last, her boots filled with sand, her dress torn and clinging to her skin. She had lost her way after her wagon train was attacked. Alone, abandoned, she carried only a small canteen, which had long since gone dry. By now, she no longer feared death. It almost seemed a mercy. She fell to her knees, the coarse sand biting into her skin. The horizon wavered, shimmering with heat. She tried to stand, but her body betrayed her, trembling and weak. The desert wanted her life, and she was ready to surrender it. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "So, this is the end." But then, footsteps. Not the ones she had dreamed in fevered hallucinations, real ones. A shadow fell across her face, shielding her from the burning sun. She opened her eyes to see him, tall, strong, his skin bronzed by the same merciless desert that sought to kill her. His long black hair was bound with leather, his dark eyes steady and piercing. An Apache warrior. For a moment, she thought she was imagining him, another cruel mirage. But when he crouched beside her and pressed a cool water skin too, her lips, reality hit her with a jolt. The water was real. She drank desperately, choking and coughing, but he pulled it back with a firm hand, not letting her drain it all. "You will live," he said, his voice low and calm, accented but steady. "But only if you stay." She blinked at him, struggling to understand. "Stay." He nodded, his gaze unyielding. "With me, as my wife." The words struck harder than the sun itself. She stared at him in disbelief, her cracked lips trembling. "Wife? I don't even know you." His face was unreadable, carved from stone. "I found you here, alone. The desert is death. My water, my horse, my strength, these will be yours. But not freely. You will live under my protection, as my woman." Evelyn's heart pounded. It was madness, unthinkable, to bind herself to a stranger, an Apache warrior no less, when she had grown up fearing the very stories told of his people. But the desert around her whispered of death, and the hollow ache in her body reminded her she would not last another day alone. "You're asking me to choose between death and you," she rasped, her voice breaking. "I ask nothing," he replied simply. "The desert takes, or I give. The choice is yours." Her mind swirled with fear, shame, and desperation. She thought of her family, gone forever. She thought of the men who abandoned her, leaving her to die. She thought of the emptiness of the desert and how it welcomed her with open, burning arms. At last, she lowered her eyes, tears slipping down her dust-streaked cheeks. I'll stay." The warrior nodded once, a slight flicker of approval passing his features. Without another word, he lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but her strength was gone. Her head rested against his chest, where she could hear the steady beat of his heart, strong, alive, unyielding. As his horse carried them across the barren land, Evelyn clutched the reins of her new fate. She had chosen survival, but deep within she wondered, had she stepped from death's grasp into another kind of captivity? Or would this strange bargain prove to be something she could never have imagined? Salvation not only of her body, but of her heart. The desert watched silently, as if it knew the story had only just begun. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke and the faint crackle of fire. For a moment she thought she had perished in the desert, and this was the afterlife. But when she blinked, the world sharpened into focus. The Apache warrior was crouched by a small fire, roasting strips of meat. They were camped beneath a cluster of jagged rocks that offered shade, the horse tied nearby. She lay on a blanket, her lips no longer burning, her throat soothed by water he had given her through the night. Reality crashed over her like a wave. She was alive, but bound to him by the bargain he had demanded. Her voice was weak, but she managed, Why ask for such a thing? Why wife? The Apache didn't turn at first. He tossed a twig into the flames, his face calm, as if he had been expecting the question. At last he looked at her, his eyes dark and steady. My people, he said slowly, do not take lightly what is given. To save a life is to take responsibility for it. A woman without family, without tribe, is a ghost in the desert. Ghosts do not live long. A wife, however, she is protected. She has honor. Evelyn's throat tightened. His words weren't a threat, but neither were they gentle. They carried the weight of law, of tradition she could not hope to understand. You could save me without this, she whispered. You don't need to chain me. At that, a shadow flickered in his expression. He leaned closer, his voice lower, colder. I do not chain, I offer. You choose. She flinched at his tone but forced herself to hold his gaze. In truth, she had already chosen when she accepted his water. Yet, part of her clung to the notion that she still had freedom, some sliver of choice left to her. He handed her a strip of meat. Eat. Strength will return, then we ride. Her hunger overwhelmed her pride. She ate in silence, each bite bringing life back to her frail body. All the while, her mind spun with questions. Who was this man? Why had fate crossed their paths? And could she ever forgive herself for agreeing to a bargain that felt both like salvation and a prison? As the fire dwindled, she studied him. His movements were precise, disciplined. His hands, though rough, treated her with surprising care, adjusting the blanket when the wind shifted, ensuring she had water before himself. He was not cruel, not careless. Yet he kept his distance, his eyes watchful, as if testing her resolve. Finally, Evelyn whispered, Do you even know my name? The warrior paused, then shook his head. It does not matter. You will have a new one with me. His answer stung, yet strangely, it also sparked something she couldn't name. Was he dismissing her past or offering her a chance to start over? She wasn't sure. That night, as the stars stretched like silver dust across the black sky, Evelyn lay awake, her thoughts restless. She had agreed to survive under his protection, but the word wife echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. What did it mean here, in the wild silence of the desert? Would she be nothing more than property? Or was there something in his eyes, something unspoken, that hinted at more than a bargain? She turned her head slightly, watching him as he sat by the fire, silhouetted against the flames, strong, silent, alone, perhaps as bound by his own scars as she was by hers. For now, she had no choice but to follow him. But deep inside, a new question burned brighter than her fear. Could this bargain of life become something like love?
The Apache warrior rode with Evelyn across the desert for what felt like days. The sun was merciless, but she no longer felt the same gnawing fear of death. His horse carried them swiftly, his arm steady around her, the water skin always at her lips before thirst overcame her.
Yet the weight pressing on her chest was heavier than before. She was alive, yes, but alive under the shadow of a vow she had not truly wanted. By the third evening they reached his people's camp, nestled in a canyon where streams trickled, and cottonwood trees cast cool shade. The shift was overwhelming. After the emptiness of the desert, the camp seemed vibrant, children laughing, women grinding corn, men tending to horses. But when the people saw her, everything stilled. Eyes turned sharply toward her, some curious, others hostile. A white woman, carried into the heart of an Apache camp, wrapped in the protection of one of their warriors. Whispers stirred like desert winds. Evelyn lowered her gaze, shame burning through her. The warrior dismounted and helped her down gently. "You will walk beside me," he said firmly, not as a suggestion, but as a command. Her legs trembled, not from weakness, but from dread. Still, she followed him, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. They approached an elder, a man with a face etched in deep lines, his hair white as bone. The elder's eyes lingered on her, sharp but not unkind, before he turned to the warrior and spoke in their language. Evelyn could not understand the words, but she heard her own fate being weighed in them. At last, the elder nodded. The warrior turned to her. "They know. You are mine now." The words struck her like a blow. She wanted to scream, to protest, to tell him she had never truly agreed. But what good would it do? Alone, without allies, what power did she have? She clenched her fists, holding back tears. That night, she was given a small lodge, a blanket, and food. The warrior remained outside, sitting silently by the fire. Not once did he cross into her space. Not once did he reach for her, as a man might a wife. Instead, he kept his distance, his eyes steady whenever she glanced his way. Confusion knotted inside her. She had expected force, possession, perhaps even cruelty, but instead she was met with restraint. He had claimed her, yes, but not touched her. "Why?" she asked softly one evening, unable to contain the question. He looked at her for a long moment, the firelight flickering across his sharp features. "Because a vow is not taken in haste," he said simply. "You are my wife by word, but a wife in truth must come by time." His words unsettled her. Did that mean he truly intended to keep her, to live beside her as husband and wife with patience instead of force? The thought both terrified and strangely calmed her. Days passed. She began to walk among the camp, though always with eyes upon her. Children sometimes followed, giggling and pointing. Women whispered, some with pity, others with disdain. Evelyn kept her head down, torn between humiliation and the strange comfort of being fed, clothed, and no longer facing death each dawn. And always he was near, her shadow, her protector. Not affectionate, not cruel, just present, watching, waiting. At night, when silence fell heavy, Evelyn lay awake, torn in two. Part of her longed to flee, to run from this vow she had never truly chosen. Yet another part, small but growing, felt a flicker of safety she had never known before. Perhaps she thought the vow was unwanted now. But what if, in time, it became something else? The nights in the Apache camp were cool and filled with unfamiliar sounds, owls calling in the canyon, drums echoing faintly from distant fires, the low hum of voices speaking a language Evelyn could not yet understand. She often sat just outside the lodge, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the firelight flickering against the canyon walls. It was during these hours that the silence between her and the warrior grew the heaviest. One evening, after days of unspoken tension, Evelyn found her courage. "You saved my life," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But you do not know who I am, what I carry." The warrior, seated across the fire, lifted his eyes to her. They were deep and unreadable, yet steady, as if urging her to continue. She swallowed hard, the words burning in her throat. "I came with a wagon train. They promised safety, a future out west. My husband—" She paused, shame tightening her chest. "He was among them. When we were attacked, he ran, left me behind, left me to die in the sand." Her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her face, tears slipping through her fingers. "I wasn't even worth saving to him. I wasn't enough." The fire snapped, filling the silence. For a long time, the warrior said nothing. Then, With a low sigh, he leaned closer, his dark eyes glinting with something she hadn't expected. Understanding. My wife, he said slowly, the words heavy with memory, was taken by soldiers. I fought, but too many came. They killed her before my eyes. Her blood fell into the earth, and my heart turned to stone. Evelyn's breath caught. His tone was steady, but beneath it she heard a raw wound, one that had never healed. They said I should take another woman, he continued, but none were her. My people tell me to be strong, to forget. But I do not forget. I live with her ghost. He lifted his gaze to meet hers fully. You think you are alone in betrayal. You are not. We both have been left behind by those we trusted. The words sank into Evelyn like rain into dry earth. For the first time, she saw him not just as the stern warrior who had claimed her, but as a man who carried his own chains of loss. Quietly, she said, "So we are both broken." His lips pressed into a firm line, but he gave a single nod. Yes, broken, but alive. For a long while they sat without speaking, the fire crackling between them. Evelyn felt the sharp edges of her grief soften in the warmth of his presence. There was no judgment in his eyes, no dismissal of her pain. Instead, there was a shared weight, a silent acknowledgement that survival often came with scars too deep to see. Finally, she asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you regret saving me?" His gaze lingered on her, steady and searching. "No," he said at last. "The desert gives few chances. I took this one." The words startled her. He spoke not of obligation or bargain, but of choice. A choice that had bound them together in ways neither fully understood. That night, as Evelyn lay beneath the stars, she felt something shift within her. She still feared the path before her, still questioned the vow that had tied her fate to his. But she also felt the first fragile thread of connection. Her past was full of abandonment, his of loss. And though neither had chosen their scars, here in the heart of the desert, two broken souls had begun to see themselves reflected in one another. Perhaps, she thought, healing was not found in turning back, but in walking forward with someone who knew what it meant to hurt. The ceremony had changed everything. From that night forward, Evelyn was no longer the white woman who survived the desert. She was the wife of a respected warrior, and the tribe began to treat her as one of their own. The shift was subtle. At first, an old woman pressing cornmeal into her hands, children running to her without hesitation, a young girl braiding strands of leather into her hair. The stares of suspicion were gone, replaced by nods of welcome. Evelyn, for the first time in her life, felt like she belonged. Her days filled with rhythm. She rose at dawn with the women, learned to grind corn more skillfully, and soon found herself weaving baskets under the guidance of patient hands. She discovered joy in the laughter of children who brought her wildflowers and asked her to tell stories of the world she came from. At first, her voice faltered, but with time, her words grew steadier. Evenings were her favorite. When the work of the day ended, she would sit by the fire beside him. The warrior who had once claimed her by bargain, but now stood beside her by bond. He was not a man of many words, but his presence spoke enough. Sometimes he would tell her the stories of his people, tales of Coyote, the trickster, of the sacred mountains, of battles fought and won. His voice was deep, steady, carrying both sorrow and pride. At night, when they shared the lodge, she began to notice small things. How he always made sure her blanket was tucked against the cold. How he left the best portion of food for her without comment. How his eyes softened, if only briefly, when she laughed. Evelyn's heart, once heavy with fear, began to stir with something new. She had not chosen this path willingly at first. She had thought of herself as a captive, a woman bound. by desperation. But now she realized she was living, not surviving, not merely enduring, but truly living. One evening, as the firelight danced across his face, she whispered, "I used to believe I had no place in this world, that I was meant to be forgotten." He turned to her, his dark eyes steady. "And now?" She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Now, I think I have found a home." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then his hand reached across the space, rough and calloused, resting over hers. No words followed, but none were needed. The warmth of his touch was enough. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn began to learn more of his language. She stumbled, often, earning laughter from the children, but the warrior corrected her patiently, sometimes with the faintest curve of a smile. She learned his name, Takoda, meaning friend to all, a name that, slowly, became a comfort to her lips as the seasons shifted, so too did her heart. The vow that once felt like a chain now felt like a thread of fate, weaving her life into his. She began to understand that he had not claimed her to control her, but to protect her. He had given her a chance to live, and in return, she had given him something he thought lost forever: companionship, trust, and perhaps one day, love. One night, as the stars spread like silver dust above them, Evelyn lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside her. She thought of the desert that had once nearly claimed her life. Now, that same desert had given her something she never believed she could find again: a future. She turned slightly, watching Takoda in the soft glow of the fire. For the first time, she did not see the stranger who had bargained for her life. She saw the man who had become her home. The weeks of peace did not last forever. One morning, while Evelyn was gathering water from the stream with the other women, the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the canyon. Dust rose against the horizon, and soon a group of riders appeared, white men, armed and stern-faced. They carried the mark of soldiers, though their coats were worn and their faces hardened by travel. The camp erupted in alarm. Warriors rushed to defend their people, bows raised, while children were ushered behind shelters. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat when she recognized one of the men, a face from her past. It was Caleb, her brother-in-law, who had ridden with her husband, the day she was left behind. His voice rang out across the distance. "Evelyn, by God, you're alive!" Her knees weakened. Memories surged. The abandonment, the cruel laughter of her husband, the despair she had swallowed as the desert baked her skin. Now, these men had returned, not out of love, but for something else. Caleb dismounted, his gaze sweeping the Apache, with thinly veiled contempt before landing back on her. "You don't belong here," he said firmly. "We've come to take you back." The words twisted inside her. Once, she might have wept with joy at being rescued. But now, standing among the Apache women, with Takoda at her side, she felt no relief. She felt only fear, fear of being torn from the life she had begun to build. Takoda stepped forward, his stance protective, his hand resting near his knife. His voice was calm, but edged with steel. "She is not yours to take," Caleb sneered. "She's a white woman, not one of you. You think she'll stay here living like this? Evelyn, come, we'll take you home." The word home struck her like a knife. She thought of the house she had once lived in, where silence and cruelty weighed heavier than walls. She thought of her husband, whose betrayal had left her for dead. That was not home. This camp, these people, this man beside her, this was home. Her hands trembled, but she stepped forward, placing herself between Takoda and Caleb. "I'm not going with you," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. Caleb's face hardened. "You've gone mad. These people, savages, have twisted you." He reached out, as if to grab her arm. In an instant, Dakota was there, his hand gripping Caleb's wrist like iron. The camp tensed, warriors drawing closer, ready for blood. Evelyn's breath caught. She had the power to end this, to choose her path once and for all. She looked at Caleb, her voice steady. "I was lost in the desert, abandoned by my own. He saved me, not as a prisoner, as his wife. I belong with him, with them." The words rang through the canyon, sharp and unshakable. Caleb's mouth opened, then closed. He saw it in her eyes, the finality, the choice that could not be undone. Slowly, with bitterness etched across his face, he pulled his hand free. "Then you're no sister of mine," he spat, mounting his horse. The soldiers turned away, their departure heavy with anger, but they did not draw steel. Soon their figures vanished beyond the horizon, swallowed by dust. Silence settled over the camp. Evelyn's chest heaved, her heart racing. Then Dakota turned to her. His eyes, usually so guarded, were soft now, filled with a depth she could scarcely bear. "You chose," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, I chose you." And in that moment, the desert felt different. No longer a place of death, no longer a wasteland of despair. It was the soil where her new life had taken root, where love had grown from survival, and where her final test had given her strength. She had entered the desert as a woman abandoned. She remained as a wife, a partner, and a woman reborn. Evelyn had earned her place. The trial of fire changed how the tribe looked at her, no longer just as the white woman the warrior had dragged from the desert, but as someone who had fought for life and returned. Women began to invite her to share tasks. Children laughed around her without fear, and even the men greeted her with nods of acknowledgement. For the first time, she felt threads of belonging weaving around her heart, and yet the word that bound her still echoed, wife. At night, when the camp quieted and the stars wheeled across the dark sky, Evelyn would lie awake in the lodge. She thought of her old life, her husband who had abandoned her, the world she had left behind. She thought of the warrior's steady eyes, of the bargain he had made in the desert. She respected him, perhaps even trusted him, but could she ever truly love him? Or was she only surviving under a vow she had never freely chosen? The questions gnawed at her. One night, as the moon cast silver light across the canyon, Evelyn made her decision. She would leave. Not because she hated him, but because she needed to know who she was without his protection, without his claim. She needed freedom. She waited until the camp slept. Quietly, she gathered a blanket, a small piece of dried meat, and a flask of water. Her hands trembled as she stepped beyond the circle of fires, her heart pounding. Every step away from the eye. Camp felt heavier, but the thought of escape kept her moving. The desert stretched before her, silent and endless. She walked until her legs ached, until her lips were dry again. The stars above seemed to whisper of freedom, yet beneath them, the desert was merciless. Soon, her water ran low. Soon, the shadows around her felt like threats. By dawn, exhaustion clawed at her. She stumbled and fell against a rock, her body weak. For the second time in her life, the desert waited to claim her, and then, hoofbeats. She looked up, half in dread, half in relief. The Apache warrior rode toward her, his figure sharp against the rising sun. His face was grim, his jaw tight. He dismounted and strode toward her, his shadow falling over her as it had the first day he found her. "You would rather die again than stay," he said, his voice hard but not cruel. Tears welled in her eyes. "I had to try. I had to know if I was here because I chose it, or because you left me no choice." He stared at her, the silence stretching long. Then he knelt beside her, his hand brushing the hair from her face. His touch was gentle, though his words were heavy. "You think you are bound like a prisoner," he said. "But listen, my people do not keep slaves. If you walk away, I will not chain you. I will not stop you again. But the desert will. It is not me who binds you, Evelyn. It is life itself." Her breath caught. She wanted to argue, but his eyes burned with truth. She had tried to run, and the desert had nearly killed her again. Survival was not something she could claim alone. Not yet. Slowly, he helped her to her feet. "Come," he said. "Not because I command it, because you are not ready to walk alone." Evelyn leaned against him, too weak to protest. But as he lifted her onto his horse, her heart twisted with something new, an ache she couldn't name. She had run for freedom, and he had found her again, and though she still longed for choice, she realized that some part of her had already chosen him. After Evelyn's failed escape, a quiet shift took root between her and the Apache warrior. He had not punished her, had not bound her, had not even spoken much of it afterward. Instead, he carried her back to camp in silence, his arm steady but his gaze far away. She could not read his thoughts, yet something in his restraint unsettled her more than anger would have. Days passed, and the tribe moved as they always did, preparing for the season's rituals. Evelyn began to notice whispers among the women, glances exchanged between the elders and the warrior. The night of a full moon was approaching, and with it, a ceremony of union. It was the elder with the snow-white hair who came to her one evening. His English was halting, but his meaning was clear. "You walk with us. You fight with us. Now you must choose." Evelyn's heart pounded. She understood at once. This was no longer about survival. This was about becoming one of them, or remaining forever an outsider. That night, the warrior sat by the fire, his gaze fixed on the flames. Evelyn gathered her courage and sat across from him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, softly, she said, "They want us bound before the tribe." He nodded once. His eyes lifted to hers, dark and steady. "It will not be as the desert bargain, not survival. Choice. Yours." The words struck deep. For so long she had lived under the shadow of his vow. "I'll save you, but only as my wife." Yet now, he offered her the one thing she had hungered for most, freedom to decide. Evelyn's mind swirled with memories. Her husband, abandoning her in the desert. The fear that had nearly consumed her. The nights of hunger and despair. And then, the warrior. Silent, steady, watching over her, never taking what was not freely given. She thought of the child she had saved during the raid, of the women who now smiled at her in the mornings, of the way her heart steadied when she saw him near. At last, she whispered, "I will stand with you. Not because I must, but because I wish it." A flicker passed across his face, something she had never seen before. Relief. He inclined his head, but his voice was quiet. "Then tomorrow the people will see it. No longer a bargain. A bond." The ceremony came beneath the full moon. The tribe gathered around a great fire, drums echoing through the canyon, voices rising in chant. Evelyn stood at the center, her hands trembling, but her gaze fixed on him. He stood tall, proud, his eyes locked with hers. The elder stepped forward, speaking words she could not understand, but their rhythm pulsed like the beating of a heart. A blanket was draped over their shoulders, binding them together. The firelight flickered across their faces as the chant rose, surrounding them in sound and flame. Evelyn's chest tightened. This was not the life she had imagined, not the path she had once longed for. Yet as the warmth of the blanket pressed her closer to him, as the steady beat of his heart filled her ear, she realized something startling. She did not feel trapped. She felt chosen. When the ceremony ended, the tribe cheered, voices rising like wind through the canyon. The warrior turned to her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Now, wife, but by your word, not mine." Her eyes stung with tears. She nodded, her voice breaking but firm. "By my word." The desert that had nearly killed her had now witnessed her rebirth. Not as a captive, not as a stranger, but as a woman who had chosen her place, and the man who had saved her. Life not once, but countless times. Evelyn had begun to find small rhythms in her new life. She rose with the women at dawn, learned to grind corn on stone, and carried water from the stream. Though many eyes still followed her with suspicion, the sting of being a stranger was softening. Sometimes a child would smile at her. Sometimes a woman would offer quiet help with a task. Most of all, the warrior's presence remained, silent, steady, always near. Yet peace in the desert was fragile. One evening, as dusk painted, the sky red and gold, riders appeared on the horizon. A scout rushed into camp with news. White raiders had been sighted. Men who roamed the frontier with no loyalty to any flag, taking what they wanted. Horses, supplies, even lives. Fear rippled through the camp. Women gathered their children, men readied their weapons. Evelyn watched as the Apache warrior strapped his bow and knife across his chest, his face carved with grim focus. "You must stay here," he told her. "Do not leave the lodge." But Evelyn's heart hammered. The raiders were her people, at least in skin, if not in soul. She remembered the cruel laughter of men like them, the kind who had abandoned her in the desert. A shiver of dread ran down her spine. The attack came swiftly. Shots cracked through the night air, and the camp erupted in chaos. Evelyn crouched low inside the lodge, hands pressed to her ears as screams and gunfire mingled. The smell of smoke seeped in, acrid and choking. Then a cry pierced her heart, a child's wail close by. Without thinking, Evelyn pushed aside the lodge's flap and saw a small girl struggling to run as flames from a burning wagon spread. The raiders were closing in. Against every order, every instinct to hide, Evelyn darted forward. She scooped the child into her arms, shielding her as she ran toward the stream. Bullets whizzed past, sand kicked up beneath her feet. For a moment, she thought she would fall, until a shadow leapt between her and the danger. It was him, the Apache warrior. His knife flashed in the firelight, cutting down one raider, then another. He barked something in his tongue, sharp and commanding, and two young men rushed to help her carry the child to safety. Evelyn collapsed by the stream, clutching the girl to her chest, her body trembling. She had disobeyed him. She had left the lodge. But when he returned to her side, blood streaked across his arm, his eyes blazing. He did not scold her. Instead, he looked at the child in her arms, and then back at her. For the first time, his hard expression softened into something like pride. "You have courage," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "You fought for my people as if they were yours." Her throat tightened. "Because they are," she whispered, surprising even herself with the words. The battle waned by dawn. The raiders fled, leaving behind smoke, blood, and grief. The camp mourned their losses, but they also gathered in quiet strength, repairing what had been broken. And through it all, Evelyn stood beside the warrior, no longer just the outsider he had claimed by bargain. That night, when the camp was silent once more, he sat beside her by the dying fire. "You chose to stand," he murmured, his gaze steady on hers. "Not because of me, because of them. That is honor." Evelyn lowered her eyes, heat rushing to her cheeks. Something stirred in her chest, unfamiliar but undeniable. For the first time since the desert, she did not feel like a captive, or even like a stranger. She felt, however fragile, like she belonged. But deep in her heart, she knew The threats of the desert were not over. And the bond forming between her and the Apache would be tested again, and harder, before it could truly become unbreakable. The attack left scars on the camp, burned shelters, stolen horses, and mourners grieving their dead. Yet Evelyn noticed something else had changed too. Since the night of the raid, when she risked her life to save the child, the way people looked at her was different, no longer only with suspicion. Now there was something else in their eyes. Respect, perhaps, though fragile and unspoken. Still, not everyone was convinced. Around the council fire, murmurs spread among the elders. She was white, an outsider. Her presence could bring more danger. What if her loyalty lay not with them, but with the men who had attacked? The warrior sat in silence as the elders spoke. His broad shoulders tense, his jaw hard. At last the eldest man rose, his voice carrying across the circle. If she is to remain here, she must prove her spirit. Words are wind, deeds are fire. Only fire shows what is true. Evelyn felt the weight of 100 eyes turned toward her. Her stomach tightened. She barely understood their customs, their rules. But she understood this. She was being tested. Later that night, the warrior explained in low tones. They will ask you to walk into the desert with nothing but a knife and a water skin. You must return in 3 days, alive. Then they will see if you are weak, or if you are strong enough to be one of us. Her mouth went dry. Alone? Out there? I nearly died last time. His dark eyes held hers steadily. Yes, and yet you lived. You can live again. Terror and defiance warred inside her. Part of her wanted to scream that this wasn't fair, that she didn't owe these people anything. But another part, the part that had carried a child through fire and faced down raiders, knew this was more than a trial. This was her chance to claim a place here, to be seen not as a burden, not as a bargain, but as herself. At dawn, she was given the knife, the water skin, and nothing else. The camp gathered to watch as she stepped into the endless stretch of desert. The sun glared down, the wind tugged at her dress, and her heart pounded with every step. Behind her, she knew he was watching. She could feel his gaze on her back, like a silent promise. He believed she could do this. The first day was agony. The heat pressed down like a hand determined to crush her. She rationed her water carefully, remembering how quickly desperation had consumed her before. When the sun fell, she found shelter beneath a rocky ledge, clutching the knife as coyotes howled in the distance. The second day brought hunger. Her stomach knotted with pain, but she remembered the warrior's lessons. He had shown her which cactus held water, how to listen for the scurry of lizards. She forced herself to act, to kill, to survive. The knife in her hand was no longer foreign. It became an extension of her will to live. By the third day, her body trembled with exhaustion, but her spirit burned fiercely. Each step toward the canyon felt like defiance, like she was telling the desert itself, "You will not take me this time." When she stumbled back into the camp at dusk, dust covering her face, the water skin nearly empty but still in her hand, the camp erupted in astonishment. Children ran to her. Men and women stared in silence, and the elder who had demanded the trial nodded slowly, respect etched across his weathered face. The warrior stepped forward, his eyes fierce with pride. He did not touch her, but his voice carried through the camp. She walked through fire, and she returned. She is not a ghost. She is one of us. For the first time since the desert, Evelyn lifted her chin. Her chest swelled with something stronger than relief. Belonging. The trial of fire had not only proven her strength to them, it had proven it to herself.